people from our different, we have a lot of disciplinary focuses here, so any questions from students or faculty for here?
Don't be shy. Yes.
Along the lines of resilience, you said that you interviewed over 100 people or around 100 people, and you showed us some of their images in the video at the start of your presentation. I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us some of their stories? Just,
Yeah.
you know, any that kind of come to mind in terms of...
Well, let me see. Barney Frank, for example, Representative Barney Frank, now retired. Barney, you know, was a closeted gay man for many years, representative from Boston, and when he came out, and by that what I mean is when he embraced the fact that he was a gay man, and I use those words deliberately. He embraced the fact that he was a gay man, and I was saying earlier that, you know, those who believe that homosexuality is a choice, what I like to say is the only choice is whether to accept the fact that you are gay or to spend your life rejecting it and investing all your energy in rejecting yourself. But when Barney embraced the fact that he was gay, he described in our interview, you know, just this tremendous difference it made in his life, that he started dieting and exercising, and I remember, I used to see him in DC at Lambda Rising, which was the LGBT bookstore, no longer there, unfortunately, but it was kind of an informal community center in DC, so you never knew who you would run into there, including commerce people, and, but I remember seeing Barney there, sort of a pre and post Barney, and the difference was really palpable. I mean, because before he looked like somebody who didn't feel so good about himself. But afterwards, I mean, he really did. He trimmed down, he had cool glasses, a different haircut. He just seemed to carry himself differently. And so indeed, you know, when I actually interviewed him and spoke about that, and he's married, he has an amazing, wonderful story about how he met his husband, and how his husband's first husband was terminally ill and wanted to leave his widower, his partner, you know, in good hands. And so he actually facilitated an introduction with Barney because he thought that Barney would make a good partner. So, you know, his relationship has really bolstered his resilience. And one of the funny things he told me was that now, well, he's now retired, but you know, others in Congress, he was the chairman of the banking committee in 2008, and that's significant because that's when the banking crisis and the mortgage crisis all happened. So Barney, the Dodd-Frank Act, which is notorious to some and liked by others, but he was the Frank in that, the name of that act. But he said that now people pointed out to him what a difference in him. So that's one story. I mean, I mentioned Donnell Robinson earlier, whose stage name is Ella Fitzgerald. And I knew of Ella Fitzgerald all the years I lived in DC. You know, over the years, it got so I loved going to Ziegfeld's, the club in Washington that it's kind of a very well-known older club for drag shows. And mostly young Black and Latino guys, you know, doing amazing drag shows. They're incredibly talented, and their costumes are just over the top. But anyway, Donnell's story, you know, here's this 5'2" Black femme gay guy growing up in the farmland of Western Virginia. His grandparents raised him, basically, and when he finished high school, his grandfather said, this is no place, you know, for a 5'2" Black femme guy. Gave him a couple $1,000 and told him to pursue his life, you know. So he wound up in DC and performed in a drag competition. This is like 1974. And after that was offered a regular gig. And 45 years later, he's still performing and now has earned the status, has for many years. He's always one of the grand marshals of the Pride Parade in DC. But Ella is described as DC's premier drag queen. And the reason I mention Donnell's story is because, there's Barney Frank. There's someone at the pinnacle of political power and all this. Then you have someone like Donnell, who the resilience that he demonstrated in his life, getting out of a place where he was not going to thrive there. It would be unsafe for him probably, but more importantly, he wouldn't be able to realize his role, his identity. And instead, he created a life for himself in Washington, as the mother of the house at Ziegfeld's, where he is now the mentor and, maternal nurturing figure for a lot of young guys who are in similar situations to what he was 40 years ago. There's so many stories like that, and I really have a range of stories from, like I said, from DC's most famous drag queen to retired ambassador Michael Guest, who was the first openly gay ambassador. Bill Clinton appointed an ambassador during a break, so it wasn't the same as being confirmed by the Senate, the usual process. And Michael, who was a friend of mine, was confirmed as U.S. ambassador to Romania under George W. Bush. I went to his swearing in a week after 9/11 at the State Department. It was very interesting when that was the beginning of the responses to the terrorist attacks, with Jersey barriers and all kinds of heightened security. But it was an amazing experience to see Michael and his partner, Alex, sitting on the dais with Condoleezza Rice and Laura Bush, and actually Colin Powell. Again, another person who moved at these very high levels, when he was ambassador to Romania, and I have this whole wonderful story that he told me, how when he arrived in Bucharest, his first press conference, for days before his arrival, all of the newspapers there were all about the gay ambassador, the gay American ambassador and his boyfriend. And so at his first press conference with the Romanian press, none of the reporters asked anything about his being gay. And so at the end of it, he said, well, aren't you going to ask me about being gay? And so one reporter stood up and said, well, you brought it up. We didn't. And he said, no, it's been all over the media, so let's get this out on the table. And once they did, and they moved past that, and they realized that he wasn't going to back down, and that he was actually a very competent diplomat. By the time they left Romania, he was given like the highest national medal from the president of the country, and really one of the best known public figures in the country, gay American man. And when I first met Michael, we met at karaoke in Washington, and then we became friends, and then he became an ambassador. But when I first knew him, my impression of Mike was that he was kind of closeted, And here I was writing about AIDS and writing about all this gay stuff, and I always felt like he was a little maybe uneasy with me. But as I saw him over the years after he took that role, and as I saw him blossom, into a self-affirming gay man, it was really tremendous, and I, felt incredibly proud of him. But I've seen that in so many people, and Mike was raised actually in a very conservative Southern Baptist family in South Carolina. His father, his uncle, and his grandfather were Southern Baptist preachers. But, and when he decided he was going to be a diplomat, the reason his parents were horrified is because it would mean he would drink champagne, at embassy dinners and things. And fortunately, they seem to have gotten past that because they were sitting and beaming proudly from the dais when he was sworn in with his partner, now husband. They've been together now for years and years. Yeah. So those are a couple of the stories.